We're still talking about Jewish people, right?
We're talking about Israelites and Judeans at this.
Yes.
So
Okay.
Jewish is a later term.
Okay.
So how would you say someone is Jewish? Again, if the Persians are a help here, they say, well, they recognize this territory that they're ruling over as Yehud because the people there must have identified as being Yehudim or Jews.
Dr. Pytlik, when did the Jewish people form a polity? And we discussed some of it in the prior segment as well.
The first one we can determine, and we have some textual evidence, most notably, say, the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and the 1st Kings, where we have our great hero, David.
King
We have
David.
King David, we have Saul just before him, but the archaeology and the text don't really say Saul created a great, a unified kingdom. In fact, he had a lot of problems. But our big hero in this story is usually attributed traditionally to David. He established relationships with the north and with the south. So the 10 tribes of Israel, the 2 tribes in the south, and Judah, and they combine, they become a kingdom. Now, the question is, what is the evidence for this? The Bible stories are over there are here by themselves. And what evidence is there? Well, there's been enough research in the last, say, 15 years. I've been part of this for all of that time in digging up several sites in Israel to try to find if that holds. So a couple of important things to have to get straight. When should this have occurred? Because in archaeology, it's all about dating everything, right?
Of course, yeah.
So if the stories say one thing, can we really put a date to them? Well, there's a period of archaeology in Israel called Iron Age 2, and it starts roughly at about 1000 BC. Internal biblical chronology, that means the text and what we can do with certain dates based on historical events, also says David should have ruled or lived right around that 1000 years. So archaeology has a different criteria. It wants to see, what is the evidence here? What's the evidence? What's the dating? And so through a number of sites since 2008, we have worked with Hebrew University again at a number of sites that are not in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is a very difficult place to dig, and there are lots of digs going on there. But in the countryside, sort of, just opposite known Philistine sites in antiquity, we have found a number of sites where we see evidence of urbanism. We see evidence of cultural traits that are solidified by this point. Israelite sites in this culture zone, hundreds of thousands of animal bones, very few, if statistically zero, pork bones. When we go over to the Philistine sites, in some cases, a few miles away from these other sites, the diet is there between 18 and 23% pork bones. It's a very interesting cultural divide that seems to have been really solidified once these two groups went face to face. Sometimes in war, sometimes they were living side by side, we've discovered. And so it's very interesting how that process occurred. We also have fortified cities. We have taxation. We have evidence of literacy. It's not huge, but what we do have is really compelling. So when we add all these things up, like I said, the Bible can be over here. We can say from the archaeological lens, through that lens, we can see that there is several sites in that area, very close together, but also dated to about 1000 BC. So we can now say we have a fledgling small kingdom.
And when you say unified kingdom, this kingdom unified brought Judah and Israel together?
Yeah, so that's the Bible boasts that David created this unification, but it's called the Golden Age of Israel. the rulers, David and Solomon. Why? Because they unified. Now, prior to all this, in the period of the judges, we get the view there, and archaeology as well, that they seem to be not completely unified. They're not unified.
Oh.
There are different sort of probably patriarchal familial groups that more or less have extended families, small territories, farms, that type of thing. They are really reluctant to come under one king. This is very true about the biblical texts. And we also get, like you mentioned a little bit before, kingdoms like Edom and Aram and others, they're starting to form already. And so there's some interesting passages in the book of Judges where the people say to prophets, tell God we want a king over us like the other nations. Why? To fight our battles for us. Because the neighborhood is getting a little dicey. And they want this for this reason. And then there's a debate. Why should we have a king? The God comes back and says to them, you know what a king's going to do to you, right? He's going to make you go to wars. He's going to make you pay taxes. He's going to make you, do all these things. And guess what? That happens.
Yeah.
And so David comes along. And if you read the David story, which is fantastic, I'm teaching a class now about this whole period, or David, the text of David. You see a number of ways he did this. Now, David is a complex character, good, bad, great, sinister, all kinds of stuff. He was a good king for the 10th century in the Near East, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And so what does he do? He marries into the north through a whole process of being very charismatic and, of course, good looking.
What do you mean he marries into the north? Explain that, please.
Okay, so Saul is sort of in the north as the sort of ruling family there. Mm-hmm. Got some extended reach. He's got groups reporting to him. No evidence of a kingdom from the north, a northern perspective. This is within what we would see northern Israel would be today, for example. David marries into that family. His first wife is Michal, and he also, for some reason, Jonathan, Saul's son, would be next in line. Jonathan, in the textual tradition, in the literature, gives David his birthright, basically. So how that happened, it's a very interesting story itself. Mm-hmm. Okay. David does a number of things with aligning with different groups. David pulls out all the stops, and eventually, one way or another, right or wrong, he establishes a small kingdom first in Judah, in Hebron, Jerusalem, and then the tribes from the north, at least from the literary perspective, come and help. Now, how do we make sense of this grand united monarchy? Solomon inherits the kingdom from David. Solomon has less problems than David did. Solomon doesn't have to fight the Philistines, for example. Mm-hmm. It's relatively peaceful. But after Solomon's reign, they split again, north and south. They fight civil wars. So this golden age of a united monarchy is fairly short-lived.
Yeah.
Now, in the north, are they the same people as the south? I don't know if that's a question that really matters so much, but we can determine, yes, they had.
But they're both Jewish, these two peoples of the north and the south that we're talking. We're still talking about Jewish people, right?
We're talking about Israelites and Judeans.
Yes.
So okay. Jewish is a later term.
Okay.
So how would you say someone is Jewish? Again, if the Persians are a help here, they say, well, they recognize this territory that they're ruling over as Yehud because the people there must have identified as being Yehudim or Jews. But those are the ones who are living in that province called Yehud. Now, it takes a while for us to get to modern Judaism, but that's kind of even after the Second Temple is destroyed in 70 by the Romans. Then we get the interaction with Christianity and the split, and so there's a further development. The rabbis really give us modern Judaism.
Is it so? You informed us that the Persians called this area by the name, different derivations of the name Yahud. What about subsequent empires? For example, the Greeks came, the Romans came, then later Byzantium Romans came. What did they call this area?
Well,
And by
there's
area, just to sort of using modern geography, I mean current state of Israel, West Bank, Golan Heights, I
Mhm.
guess Gaza. Was this an area, or were these different, I don't know, fiefdoms, polities? Does our
for
modern sense of geography make sense for back then?
to a point, but we just have to think for a moment about the complexity of even the modern Middle East. No, nobody even agrees on who belongs where today.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's confusing. I will say this though, that we don't think in this terms, so we have to look back in time. So what do we have? We have territories. We don't really have. We have cultural borders, like I mentioned, with the diet and the circumcision and all that
Yeah.
business. We have that. And I think there would have been a strong sense that if you were in, let's say, 1000 BC or so, and you're walking to, the site I mentioned that we dug up, they would say, yes, I'm a proud follower of the tribe of Israel or something like this. Or we're the subjects of David or Saul or whoever they have associated with. And if you went across the border and you went to, say, the Philistine city of Gath, they would probably say, we are proud Cypriots or something like this from where they came. You
Yeah.
know, there are city states. City states control not only the little village that it was, but an area around it. And so there are different names for this. So a lot of them just go by the city names. Gat, Ekron, Jerusalem, this type of thing. But as far as an area, there are a number of different names over history. The earliest ones we have roughly go back to the Amarna letters from Egypt. And there are some really great clues there because they are correspondences written over several hundred years, letters, copies of letters that were sent from Amarna, which was the capital then in Egypt, to various places around the Near East that we are talking about. So they would call these places a derivation of the word Canaan. So Kana'ah or Kananu or Kina'ah, this type of thing. That's from the Amarna letters. Now, the Egyptians also had other names for this area. Generally, more or less the Sinai and modern Israel today, Jordan, even parts of Syria, they called these people, the people, Asiatics.
Asiatics.
Asiatics. That's what they refer to them. And it's a derogatory term from the Egyptians. The other name they have for these people, which is a bit ironic, is sand dwellers.
Sand dwellers, they would say that to these people? Oh, wow.
Yeah. The Phoenicians have a name that's similar to Canaan, but for this area, but they're close by. They're in, southern Lebanon today and
Yeah.
Tyre, Sidon, and some of these other places. The Assyrians called this place a derivation of the word Amuru. And so when do we get the derivation of or how do we get to Palestine? Primarily, that's the Romans.
Ah.
Now, they had changed once they had gone through a couple of revolts against the Jews. They basically outlawed Judaism in and around the area, expelled the Jews from the area, renamed Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, which means, the great capital. And they basically called this area Palestine.
What does that name even mean? Where did they get that name from?
Important to know here that this is not the same people as the Palestinians today. Okay, so they're
Oh,
not. It's a derivation on the word Philistine or the plain of Philistia, which is sort of the coastal plain along Israel that would include part of the Gaza Strip today. Tel Aviv, in that area, it's called the coastal plain or the plain of Philistia. So it's more of a geographic.
oh,
But it also is where the Philistines used to live. Now, these are not an imaginary people, and it's not just Goliath here. These are a developed society, developed culture. They have their own history. They were the remnants in all these various city states, they were wiped out too by the Assyrians and others. So they're gone from history, like even the 10 tribes of Israel. They're gone over time. And so the Christians come in, and what do they do in the Byzantine period? They divide up the area because they're very concerned about developing the Christian pilgrimage trade and also setting up an administration. This is a big empire too. In the Byzantine. They divide this area to 3 areas with the name Palestine. Palestina Prima, which is around Jerusalem, Palestina Secunda, and Palestina Tertia, basically. I might have that wrong as far as the pronunciation.
Yeah.
The 3-part areas of Palestine. So that stuck. When
That's fascinating. And this name has more to do with the geography of coastal Israel than any of the peoples, such as the Philistines that we were talking about.
So the Philistines, their own culture, they're viable culture, 600 years, but then unfortunately caught up with many other groups. The Assyrians and the Babylonians, they basically wiped them out or displaced them. They exiled those people too. So they're gone. A lot of time passes, and then it's only until the year 638 is the date, AD, CE, where we have the conquest by the Muslim forces.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a different population altogether over time, and then we end up eventually with the Palestinian people, which is a whole nother thing, of course.
Yeah. We'll be back after a short break to talk about Jews leaving Israel, and we'll even have to define that term in the next segment.